Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Communication with the afterlife has certainly been a subject that we've had here on the program, and for those of you who visited our YouTube channel would realize that, well, some of those views on something, for instance, like the afterlife of Billy Fingers, are one of those things many people are interested in. The question is, though, is how can that happen for us, or is it possible for everybody to have communications with loved ones past the realm of death? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who has just that experience. She gained a lot of spiritual wisdom from her husband who had passed away in April of this year. She's joining us here on the program to talk about her sublime inner experiences from visiting the outskirts of heaven, as she calls it. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Ms. Violet Young. Violet, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Daniel, it is such a thrill to talk with you. You are such a delightful host.
Well, it's sweet being delightful, especially with these afterlife experiences. Now, tell us what's going on here.
Well, I sent you a story that I just wrote recently for the Pathways to Transformation event program this year, and it's called Visit to the Outskirts of Heaven, and in it I relate an experience that I had with my mother as she was actively dying a number of years ago, and I wanted to send that to you because that was a really important experience for me. And after Sinclair passed away in April, I was recounting it to someone, and I recounted it in a way that I had never recounted it before. And I was having this Sunday morning conversation with a friend of mine, and when I was finished telling her about this event that had happened to me, she said to me with a kind of awe in her voice, and she said, "Violet, have you ever recorded this or told anybody this way or written this down?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, you should."
Ah.
And then she told me that it gave her tremendous comfort. And so I thought about that and decided that, considering this year and the fact that Sinclair, my chuckling cherub, had passed on April 6th, that I should, in fact, write down the story about my visit to the outskirts of heaven. And also I wanted to talk about the importance of knowing that life doesn't end when we stop having a physical body. And so since Sinclair's passing, I've been told, in the way that people like me hear things, that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so not only am I having this talk with you and writing this article for my publication, but I'm also been invited to speak in October about this same subject, and coincidentally, the person who invited me to speak blurted it out when I was in her shop trying to put flyer up on her bulletin board. She invited me to talk, and coincidentally, the day that she had available for me to speak was my husband's birthday. So I'll be speaking on his birthday in October about life after death. Mm-hmm. So I think it's true that my calling is now not necessarily to channel or become a medium, although I hope to be able to reach him myself verbally and have conversation with him, but to be able to talk with people and have people talk with me and have an outlet for people to discuss their own experiences, because so many folks are afraid to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think it is about people that seem resistant when it comes to talking about something like this?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is I think people are afraid that other folks are going to think they're nuts.
Ah, I see. Mm-hmm.
And the other part is, of course, is that if you don't have a background in spiritual or extrasensory thought process, if you don't have that kind of a mindset, when these things happen, I mean, the first thing that jumps to mind is, am I crazy? Or can I trust it? Do I believe it? You know, because of the way I was raised in a home with my mom, who, when I was young, I went to seances with her, and I grew up reading a publication called Fate magazine, which was like the shape of like a Reader's Digest kind of magazine, and it had true stories of the hereafter in it. People talked about their stories of hearing from their loved ones or feeling their loved ones close to them, and other kinds of extrasensory things. It was normal for me, but when I start speaking to people, let me tell you, it's not the norm.
Uh-huh. Now, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people really yearn to be able to reach to the other side there, but they really maybe don't know how to go about that, or, as you said, if it does occur, well, maybe they think they're kind of going crazy. So what is it like when you do connect with someone on the other side? Do they come through in dreams? Is it really sort of a sit-down conversation? What really happens?
Well, it seems to be different for everybody. Now, I can tell you, when I was, I was back in Boston, living in the Boston area, and my daughter was very young. She was like three or so. My uncle, who was a peddler, had an extremely distinct voice, as a peddler may have. He had a really gravelly voice, and he would be yelling for fruit, and he'd sell fruit and vegetables off of his. When I was a little girl, I used to go along with him with his horse and buggy. Then he got a truck when I was about 3 or 4. But when I was a little girl, I would be on his wagon with him with his horse Jerry. So I grew up hearing his gravelly voice yelling for cherries or peaches or whatever. And then in the winter, he was a peddler. I mean, he was a junk man. So he had a really distinct voice. And the year that he passed away, I was devastated. Him and my aunt were like grandparents to me. They were in their 80s. And I had been extremely close to them my whole life. And so he passed away, and I'm in my car, and I was dirt poor broke. I mean, I just had no money. My husband and I had recently split up, and I was living in a terrible place with very little money. Got the picture? It's awful. And so it's approaching the holiday time, and I keep passing a tree lot, and what I always strove to do, no matter how little money I had, was I wanted to keep our life as normal as possible. So it's Christmas, I'm going to buy a tree. Somehow or other, I'm going to have a tree. And I'm driving in my car, and there's this tree lot, and I keep going by it every day. I have to go by it to get home. And I'm sitting in traffic, and I'm glancing over at the tree lot, which is like 3 blocks away. And there's just a cute little tree. It's like a Charlie Brown tree, but the trees were like $15. And I didn't know how much that tree was, but I figured it was way more than I had. So I'm sitting in the car, and I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And as if my uncle was sitting in the car seat next to me, I heard in my head, just like it was right here, tell him you'll give him $5 for it. Now, I heard that, and I went, what? And I looked to my right, fully expecting to see Uncle Mickey sitting in the front seat with me. And he wasn't there, and I'm in traffic, and I'm like, oh, my God, I'm just under too much stress. Because even I was taken aback by that. He'd never contacted me that way before. The next thing I know, I hear it again, even louder. And so now I'm a half a block away, and I pull my car over, and I get out of my car, and I go up to the tree guy, and I look him right in the eye, and I say, I'll give you $5 for that tree. And he said, it's yours.
Well, how about that?
And I said to my uncle, thank you so much. We had a Christmas tree for $5 that year because he came and told me exactly what to say, and I said it, and I got my tree. And that was like, that came out of the blue. Was I expecting it? Was I sitting in a room dark with everybody holding hands, waiting for something to happen? No, it just happened. And I acted upon it like it was real, because guess what? It was. And, these some people go to a reader or a medium, and they, like John Edwards on TV. You've seen him on TV, I'm sure.
Sure.
They do gallery sittings, and they pick people out, and they're very skilled at what they do, and by gosh, it comes through. And I've sat in seance a number of times since I was a child. I mean, older, we have had seances in my house, and spirit has come through loud and clear. But in this situation, it can happen anytime as long as you're open to hearing it and feeling it and sensing it and being conscious and aware. And let's face it, Daniel, you have a busy life, I have a busy life. We're bombarded by noise. There's traffic, there's construction, there's people chattering, there's all kinds of interference. And how much time a day do you just sit in quiet, peaceful contemplation? Who has time unless you really make a practice of that?
Mm-hmm.
So the more you can quiet yourself, the more likely you'll be able to hear things or sense things or feel things. And spirit, the spirits of your loved ones don't always come through as clearly as, tell them you'll give them $5.
Right.
Sometimes it's way more subtle. And, my story is about a trip I took with my mother as I thought I was napping. But the connections I've had with Sinclair since he's been gone are very different from this. And one of the ways Sinclair contacted me was through our alarm clock, because Spirit finds it easy to manipulate electricity. It's one of the things that lights that flicker and things that turn off and on, those are often been associated with connecting with Spirit, and that's because it's easy for them to manipulate energy. And electricity is energy. Do you want me to tell you a little bit about the alarm clock?
Yes, please.
It was about I guess it was about the second week after he had passed, and I've got friends over. There were several of us here who were going through some things, and I had discovered a whole drawer full of photographs of his that I had never even known existed. So there was like 4 or 5 of us sitting around looking at these pictures, and it was late in the afternoon, early evening, and a little backup. I have a battery alarm clock, which has a really annoying beep, because that's what alarm clocks have, right? They have annoying beeps, and that's why you turn them off. And that's why they wake you up. And this alarm clock drove Sinclair crazy, but it was my alarm clock on my side of the bed. And because of his physical limitations, sometimes if the alarm clock got left on by me by accident, I'd get up before the thing went off, it would drive him crazy, and he would get up in not too very good a mood. About a week and a half or 2 before he passed, one morning like that occurred, and my alarm clock went off, and I didn't know. I was in another part of the house, so I never heard it. And he was up early, and his caregiver and I were in the house talking, and all of a sudden Sinclair appears from the bedroom area, dressed, ready for the day, in a really good mood, and he comes out and he says, if you grab me a cup of coffee, I'll tell you a story about the alarm clock. And Patrick and I, the caregiver and I, are looking at each other going, this is really odd, because if he was dealing with the alarm clock, most of the time he'd get up, he wasn't in a good mood. So he came out and told us that the alarm had gone off, and he had laid in bed and had been pissed off, and then decided that he could choose to make it funny, or he could choose to be pissed off. And he had decided that he was going to change things in his life, and he had been doing a lot of that, and that he was going to think it was funny. So he figured out how to get up, how to get it, how to turn it off, and he came out and he was in a good mood. And he was showing me that he had made great strides in how to deal with certain things that had always bothered him, which was really good. It was stuff he was working on.
Mm-hmm.
So now we go forward to the week after he's gone. So we're all sitting around looking at these pictures, and it's around 6:28 in the afternoon, and there's a lull in our conversation. And off in the distance, we hear the beep, 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 beep of this alarm. And we're all of a sudden, we realize it's not any of our electronic devices at the table, because we've all got cell phones and doodads. And we went, what the hell? Why is my alarm clock going off at, looking at my watch, 6:30? So my house is very small, and my girlfriend was sitting right in eye shot of my walking towards my bedroom, which is 10 steps from where I was sitting. So she watches me walk into my room. She watches me take a right turn. It's 2 more steps to the bed. I get my hand over the top of the alarm clock. I don't even touch it. And the thing stops. Now, I pick up the clock on the side, so I'm not even coming close to touching the gizmo that shows you if it's up or down or shut off. And I look at the alarm, and it is set for 9:30. And what's really important here is that the alarm was already turned off. I never touched the off and on toggle in the back. It was already off. But 5 of us heard the beep, 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 beep.
Right.
And what that was Sinclair letting us know that he was there hearing our conversations about the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's sitting there with their mouth hanging open because they all know I went in there, and before I could even get to the clock, it had shut itself off. And it hasn't even been on to start with. It was him manipulating that. And because it was the alarm clock, that was a really potent message because it was the trigger between us a lot of the time. I mean, we had more fights over that freaking clock.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny. It became a point of humor in our relationship for years. And that's another thing, is that Spirit will find something that you will connect with. And so the messages that you get are not going to necessarily be like a conversation, although I hear lots of people go off in a dream state and have conversation with their loved ones. That's true. That's one way that Spirit reaches us. But, you know, an alarm clock or a song. Sinclair sent a song to my daughter about a week and a half after he was gone. And it was during a very stressful day, and she had a lot of people in the car, and she had just flipped the radio station, and the Celine Dion song, That's the Way It Is, came up for play. And that's a song that talks about don't give up on your love. Love is the most important thing. You just keep going ahead, and love will win. Mm-hmm. And for my husband, who had grown up with a lot of fear, it had ruled his life for a lot of his life, and we had spent a great many of our 20 years together working on getting him past his fear that love would leave him. And in the end, love not only didn't leave him, love still remains today.
And I would think, too, that in the afterlife that he has that experience in, I guess, spades, for lack of a better word.
Say that again?
That he would have that experience of love in spades, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And because as he was learning in the last year of his life, you have to understand that my husband and I were together for 22 years and married for almost one whole year. He had always been afraid to get married, and when he got really sick a year ago, he ended up on kidney dialysis. And I said to him, we have to be married. There's no way to do this in any kind of sane way. We need to be married. And he agreed that we needed to be married at this point, because you just can't deal with someone who's in that kind of a situation in this day and age when they won't let you in to see somebody or something, you know, unless you have this piece of paper. So we got married right after he came home from his near-death experience in the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so we were married just shy of a whole year. And in the year and a half or so before he passed, he made enormous strides on letting go of his fears. And our relationship with each other was so deepened and so much more full of beauty because of his willingness to let go of his fear. And in the last couple of months of his life, he spoke to me often of how happy he was that we had gotten married and how happy he was and how much he recognized the love that I had been giving him all these years, because I was his caregiver for more than 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent, most couples who are married, a lot of them who work outside the home, don't spend more than a few hours a day, and they sleep in the same bed or in the same house. We worked and lived and spent hours every day together. We were together more than we were apart.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, we almost had 2 lifetimes together, you know. So it's important to know that not every time you connect with spirit is it going to be as blatant as, you know, someone channeling for you or hearing a voice. You might get a song. You might get a touch. You might have an alarm clock go off. It's a matter of being conscious enough to recognize those subtleties and knowing your partner or the person that you're trying to connect with on an intimate level and paying attention to the kinds of connections they might try to make with you. Because realize that spirit, let's face it, they don't have any confines of bodies. Mm-hmm. And the density of the energy there is much less. I mean, here we are in this really heavy energy because it's what creates our physicality. And when you're out in the ethers, you don't have to deal with that. You're just pure energy. Mm-hmm. You don't have all of those constraints. So trying to bridge those gaps can be a little bit more difficult.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned about Sinclair having a fear of love, I guess. And,
yeah.
You know, it made me think when we come into this life, because you hear the stories in the afterlife about how one of the consistent messages that they share with people in the living world, so to speak, is that, you know, we spend way too much time on fear, you know, and it sort of clouds us. It creates this veil and prevents us from living a life that could be just unbelievable. What is it about the living, you know, us here on this plane, that seems to be grappling so much with fear? It almost feels like a learned condition. I mean, sure, it's there for an instinctive survival of fight or flight, but we don't live in that kind of a world as much as we did in the time where that fight and flight response was really necessary.
Right. Unfortunately, that our bodies haven't caught up with that.
Yes, it seems that way anyway.
Well, yeah, if you just look around the world, it's pretty clear.
Right.
So the trick here is learning. That's one of the. This is one of the reasons that we're having this conversation today. You know, it's very interesting to me that over the course of my life, I have often talked with people about death, about what might happen in the afterlife, how to cope with death, how to be able to go to a funeral and not freak out. You know, I've been going to funerals since I was 2, mm-hmm. because all of the family members I grew into the family of, I was like the youngest one. 2 years after I was born, there was another child born, but other than that, the family was pretty old. And so I've been going to funerals since I was a little tiny kid. And my mother always had this attitude that death was like a doorway into another realm. I never ever really felt afraid, but I knew people who were quote-unquote, deathly afraid of death. And it never really had that big honking fear picture for me, ever. But, you know, on the other hand, it wasn't something I was looking forward to either. You know, I was here and I wanted to be in the now. So, you know, how people are brought up and what kinds of things they're taught from an early age has a large influence on how they're able to handle these things as they mature. I've actually known people who were well into their 50s who had never gone to a funeral before. And I actually had the honor of escorting a few people in that same situation to funerals because they didn't know how to go. They were so afraid. They were paralyzed to even go, but they had a family member or a dear friend that they really wanted to show their solidarity. And so I've actually gone with people to funerals of people I didn't know to be supportive. And the fear, we're brought up, don't touch this, watch out for that. And that all translates down into loss. We're afraid of loss. And so, the word loss in and of itself makes people afraid. You hear the word loss and everybody goes into a panic.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's one of these things that's sort of a learned behavior, and in being able to actually go past that, you just have to learn to breathe through things. Because good and bad is going to happen to each one of us. Life is life. Most people don't lead what people say are charmed lives. Most people have a smattering of this, that, and the other. It's like a big soup. There's all these different things going on. So, it's very important to remember and try to keep these things in perspective.
Mm-hmm. Now, we were talking briefly in the beginning of the program about your experience in visiting the outskirts of heaven.
Right.
What was that like?
Well, my mom had a stroke a number of years ago. I think I relate that it was 2002. And she had just had her 90th birthday, and coincidentally, it was right after our Pathways show. Like the next day, I got a phone call from my brother telling me that Mom was in the hospital. She'd had a stroke, and that I needed to come out because they were knowing that it was going to be time for her to go. And so, I took the red eye out, and I stayed with her. She had already had the stroke, and she was speaking and everything for the first week. But it became obvious that she was not going to ever be able to swallow food. And my mother, in the condition that she was in anyway, talking and eating were two of the things that were pleasurable to her. She had a lot of people that loved her and were friends with her. And one of the things that they would do is go out for dinner or lunch or something, and they would visit, and then she would chat. And so not being able to eat or talk was going to severely limit her lifestyle. And she decided that she would just decide to go. And so the way she was going to do that was they just took away fluids. And she was a large woman. So the first week she had been fed with, I guess she had had some food and had water. And the day that I arrived, they disconnected all of the tubes and everything. And so she was allowed to have what they call a dry death. I had never heard of this. I had never been in this position, and I didn't really know what to expect. So the first week we were together, which was her second week of actively dying, I basically moved into her hospital room, and I arrived, and there was nothing in her room, and she had been in a nursing home for a couple of years, and I had really decorated her room to make it seem homey to her. And so a lot of those things had been packed away when she ended up in the hospital, and the first thing I noticed was that she was looking around her room, and she was wild-eyed, and none of her things were there. And I said, told her, I said, you're looking for all of your belongings, and she nodded her head. And so when I went back to my brother's that night, I gathered up a collection of things that I knew were especially important. I brought them all back, and there I started my 2-week sojourn with her. And so I stayed with her in the hospital room, and we talked, and I sang to her, and I told her the stories that she had told me when I was a little girl to make sure that she knew that I remembered. And we talked about death, and we talked about all kinds of things. And the second week that I was there, now, mind you, she'd been having lots of friends and family visiting. The second week I was there, the beginning of the week, we decided to take a nap, and I was in one of those horrible, I don't know where they get these reclining chairs from hospitals, but can't they just get a lazy boy and be done with it? These things are torturous to sleep in. So I was laid out next to her, facing her, holding her hand in this recliner, and we fell asleep, or at least I thought I was asleep. And somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a half later, I came to, or woke up, depending on how you want to look at it, and my teeth were chattering, and I was stone cold, and I was in a hospital room in New Hampshire at the end of August. So we had the air conditioning on very lightly, like to keep the room around 70, because she didn't like it cold. It wasn't freezing in the room. My body was like a block of ice. And so I left the room quietly, and I went outside, and I started to realize that I had not had a dream. I had actually gone on this little trip with my mom, and she had taken me by the hand. I remembered sitting there, laying in the bed, and then all of a sudden I was floating. And we were out. We were just floating in this wonderfully calm, peaceful, lit but not lit environment. It's hard to describe because it was very ethereal, and yet it seems solid. So it's hard. It's really, words are poor for this, The experience for me left me with an unshakable understanding that there is nothing to fear, because I'm floating out there, I'm holding her hand, and we're sort of drifting, but we're drifting in a direction, and there's sort of this light that we're drifting towards. But everything that we're sitting in this, we're laying down. I was on my back, and it was like I was floating on an ocean of energy, and being supported and completely comfortable, and no pain, no anxiety, no anything. I was just calm and peaceful and surrounded by this, all I could say is loving energy. It was sort of like being in an energy soup, kind of like a feeling of warmth and peacefulness. And it was quiet, but it was quiet with the sound of this. It's so hard to describe.
Right.
I could hear, but I wasn't having to use my ears, and I was being told that everything was okay. I was in this place that was very peaceful. We just kept drifting closer to this light, and then all of a sudden, I realized that if I hadn't been holding her hand, I couldn't have been there, and that I couldn't just get up and walk anywhere. Not that I wanted to. I was in such a place of bliss, sort of just this most wonderful, supported feeling of like being on a cloud. If you've ever laid down on a really comfortable mattress and you sort of could just let go and drift off, sort of like that, but really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden we were just moving to this glow in the sky, sky is kind of a relative term because it's hard to say where we were. It was sort of just in this peaceful place. But there was this light. And we got closer and closer, and then we sort of came to a drifted stop. And I really wanted to get to the light. I just wanted to get closer to the light. I could just feel myself wanting to get closer to the light. And then I was told that that was as close as I could get. I was just being shown where she was going to go. And while she could go a little closer, and she didn't really leave me to go there, she could have gone, but because she was holding my hand, she really couldn't. That was where she was going to go, and I was being shown that it was okay. I was being confirmed that it was okay, and I was being shown what we had always known, that a physical death is not the same as death. There is no death. Her energy was just going to continue. And so when I came to, it meant that my body had been in New Hampshire and I had been somewhere else. The consciousness was somewhere else. And I came back and the body was just like, whoa. I came into my body and it was like, literally, my teeth were chattering. And it's 70 degrees in a room. Your teeth don't chatter.
Right.
I mean, by the time I got outside, downstairs, I grabbed a cup of coffee. At the time, I was smoking cigarettes. I went outside. It was in the middle of the day. It was sunny. It was hot. It was a week or so before Labor Day in New Hampshire. It was hot. I'm out there taking my shoes off, grabbing a tree, rubbing my feet on the grass and the ground, and trying to pull myself together and trying to reintegrate my spirit and my body, because I was like walking like Lurch.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't fully integrated by any means. And after I stood there for a while, I began to understand the kind of gift I had just been given. It was not your typical nap in the afternoon. I've never, ever felt like this, ever before or since. And what was interesting to me when I was relating this story to my friend after Sinclair had passed was that I was feeling and seeing and experiencing the experience while I was telling her, and it even had more visceral feelings to it. And I realized that Sinclair had been supplanting that information because this is what he had experienced as he was moving away from the earth when he passed. And he had described a little of that his family was, his mother was there, and that other friends and family that had gone before, and how he was moving away and how safe he felt. And so it was a very, very fascinating and interesting and deep experience for me. And so I started thinking about that, about what my friend had said about writing it down and about my need to do that and to talk about it. And since I started talking about it, you just wouldn't believe the kinds of conversations I've been having with people.
You find it very surprising that people are a lot more receptive and open than you would first think.
Well, it's like when we had our memorial celebration for Sinclair, we had a lot of people came. We had well over 100 people at the Yachats Ladies Club, and I got up to speak and I talked about a little bit about that experience, and I talked about the messages I had received from Sinclair, and I had them play the Celine Dion song, That's the Way It Is, and I was standing at the front of the room, and I was swaying to the music, and my 7-year-old grandson, who was sitting with a babysitter, he broke away from the babysitter. Now, Nathan is autistic, has global developmental delay and ADHD, and he ran up to me, and he grabbed me by my hands, and he looked me in the eye, and he's tall, he's 4'4" tall, and he looked me in the eye, and he said, "We dance now, Grandma." And he took me by the hands, and he started dancing with me, like little moving steps, no dance steps per se, just sort of shuffling little dance steps. Now, Sinclair had a lot of physical problems, and we had used to like to dance when we were first together, but because of his problems, when we did dance, it was just like that, a shuffle here and a shuffle there, and we'd dance a few bars, and we'd call it dancing, or we'd sit and dance, table dance. And it was a special thing. And so here was my grandson who came out of the crowd and grabbed my hand and said, "We dance now, Grandma." And we're dancing just the way Sinclair and I would be dancing. And everybody in the room could see Sinclair dancing with me. It was the most remarkable feeling because it wasn't like Nathan was dancing with me. It was like I was dancing with Sinclair. And when the song was over, I looked at him, I kissed him on his top of his head, and sent him back to the babysitter and continued the talk. And people were just like stunned because they could really sense that Sinclair was there with them and us at that time. Everybody could feel it. It was so different. It was a very different kind of memorial. And it's because a lot of the people who were there were definitely able to perceive that kind of energy. It's once you have those experiences, you forever are changed, and you know deep in your being that you don't have anything to fear, and that the most important thing to remember is that love is the entire part of the universe. It is what holds us together. It is the saving grace. It is the most important thing in the entire universe is love. And that we return to that love, and that love is all there is.
Mm-hmm.
And so my messages for people, and hearing people talk about these things, they're so hungry to share, but they don't know who to share with because they don't know where it's safe to share. I mean, look at how religion has treated death. And look at how people are afraid to even live, let alone die.
Right.
Look at how we've created these situations where we can have compassion for our animal friends, but we see people who are on their last legs and all they want to do is go.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know? So, the world is full of dichotomy, and it is our learning experience. It is our opportunity to choose love in every situation. And as we develop ourselves as individuals, that's our opportunity. Every time anything happens to any of us, we have an option of choosing fear or choosing love.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more conscious you can be, the more open you are, the more aware you are, the more desirous you are of peace within yourself and in the planet and on the universe in general, the more times you are aware enough to choose love, the better. And that means you choose love in all kinds of situations, from the most minute to the largest.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, you're in traffic. You live in Portland. There's no traffic there, right? The next time you have the opportunity to let somebody cut in line ahead of you, you're showing them love. It might not seem like a big deal, but to that person it could be huge. So I try to let people in. I try to let people pass. I try to give people information if they ask for it. Sometimes somebody will be in a store and they're looking confused, and I'll say, gee, do you need to find something? Are you new in the store? And they'll say, yes, I'm lost, and I'll tell them, and that makes them smile. That's just showing them love.
Mm-hmm.
And love appears in all kinds of places. So the more of that we choose, the easier our lives will be. The easier our lives are, the more love we can put out.
Mm-hmm.
The more love we put out, the better everybody is.
Mm-hmm.
If you understand how incredibly deep and important that is. It's the minutest things, because we never know whom we're serving. You know?
Exactly right, and it's always a good feeling too when you're able to serve and help others, especially with your special gifts and talents, which is one of the other reasons I believe that we were put here, was to come to recognize what our co-creative possibilities are and to actually use those. I was just talking with a lady randomly yesterday who was talking about how a year ago she went through what she would call her midlife or mid-30s crisis, actually. I was kind of surprised because, to me, I was surprised, first of all, that she was in her mid-30s, I believe it was, but that she looked as old as she did. I thought she was actually older than that.
Oh.
And, but she said she finally felt like for the first time she was really taking life, by the horn, so to speak. And I said, it's really interesting, isn't it, that we kind of go about life for the first, who knows how long for a lot of people. Generally, it's 50, 60 years, doing everything we were told we were supposed to do, trying to get it right and do the right thing according to what everybody else tells us, who seems to have the experience and the wisdom to know what's best for us. Then we get to that point where we start shaking our foundations down. We start becoming confused because the outcomes we know that we're experiencing inherently aren't true to who we are. And so that crisis does occur. And so as I described that, you could just see her look in the face like, you're totally right. Mm-hmm. And then she says, well, what do you do? And I said, well, my wife and I, we produce a radio show called Beyond 50, and this is what it's about. And, she was busily, well, how do I, get in contact and this and that and, get on the newsletter and the whole bit. And so I gave her all those particulars, and you could just feel walking away like somebody connected in a way like she didn't know that anybody understood mm-hmm. what she was going through. And I said, I think we all do, to a degree. And I said, the hardest thing, I said, the good thing is that you're having this experience now because you're still pretty young. Most people it's usually in their 50s or 60s. And once they do and they want to make that change, that they feel that they don't have the time they wish they had left. And I tell these people, well, look, you have today. That's more than enough time. If you do something wisely with it from your heart, then you might even have another day and another day, and that's all that matters. And it just seems so astounding how many people really go through life and just take it for granted.
Oh, totally. I mean, well, we always think we have more quote-unquote time. Well, we have as much time as each one of us is granted when we come. We know all this before we are born. We know what we've got. And then we come here and immediately forget it, or else we wouldn't be able to have the experience. I mean, you can't play a game knowing the outcome and still have the same experience.
No, not at all.
Not at all. And so, when we start to do the things we do, we always have choices. And I remember when I was a little kid, my mother, I guess it was Pinocchio was out when I was a little girl. In fact, I still have that little goldfish, Chloe, that was in the movie. I still have the little rubber fish. It's sitting on my sink in my bathroom. I've had her my whole life. But anyway, remember Jiminy Cricket, and he played the part of the conscience. And so when I was a little kid, my mother talked to me about using my conscience. And, of course, Jiminy Cricket was the go-to character in my little head about knowing whether I was going to do the right thing or the wrong thing. And so my guru was Jiminy Cricket, when I was a kid. And I learned to listen to that intuition. And as a small child, if I was going to do something that I knew was wrong, I would always get a certain feeling in my body. And if the certain feeling didn't feel good, I would know I shouldn't do it. Now, that didn't mean that every time I didn't do it. Sometimes I screwed up. Sometimes I just did whatever. But I could always go back to knowing that feeling inside my body when I was doing the right or the wrong thing. And as I matured, I decided that I liked feeling the good feeling rather than the bad feeling. Duh! So I chose wiser. And the more mature I've become, now I'm 65, the more mature I have become, the more often and easier it has always been to choose the love side. Mm-hmm. And I still, I lose my temper. I live out on the coast, there's lots of traffic in the summer, and you can get frustrated behind vehicles. And then I have to really stop and remember what Sinclair would tell me. Remember, we're gonna do Zen driving in the summer. We're going to look at the trees and count the new growth on them while we're waiting in traffic for the motorhomes to go by.
Right.
And how important is that? Is it gonna have a crashing halt because we're 2 minutes late? No. So then I can say, oh, gee, I'll let this person in front of me, and I can show them love and appreciation. It's not that hard. Mm-hmm. But you have to, in our culture where everybody's trying to get ahead and there's all this competition, it's like, in my family, Scrabble for a lot of people is a competitive game. In my family, we play Scrabble this way. Everybody gets their letters, and everybody takes their turn, and if somebody can't figure out something, we all help.
There you go.
At the end of the game, when each person is down to those last 5 pieces or 3 or 4, tiles, and they don't spell anything, and you spend the next 20 minutes trying to figure out how to put an X next to something, we all help each other. And so it isn't necessarily the winner who gets There is no real big winner. We've all had fun cooperating with each other to see. The big thing is can we get rid of all the tiles from everybody? That's the thrill.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody helps each other. And people go, well, you don't have the fun of the competition. And I think to myself, and how much fun is it to beat somebody? Think about the words, right? This is how our thought process is.
Well, even when, for those who are fans of the original Flintstones cartoon, there was a time where Betty and Barney and Wilma and Fred decided to spend time together playing a game of Rockopoly, as they called it. Fred got a little crazy, was getting greedy, pay up now, you're on my property, and nobody just really wanted to hang out anymore.
There you go.
So.
And so you lose that sense of humanity. And, that's what will ultimately keep us going, is our sense of humanity. And our humanity is dependent on our divinity.
Exactly. Now, Violet, with the minute and a half about that we have left, is there a website people can find out more? I know you were about to publish this story that you were talking about here, where people can find out a lot more?
Oh, yes. We're going to be putting on the Pathways to Transformation, Holistic Health, Psychic, and Crafts Fair for the 19th year at the Yachats Commons this coming weekend on the 1st and 2nd of August. And the event program, is available at chucklingcherubs.com. And it is in that event program that you'll find the little story, Visit to the Outskirts of Heaven, in which I describe my visit. And the event itself is a really cool place to come, where we've got 70 exhibitors from all over the Pacific Northwest and beyond who have visionary art. They have health and wellness products. There's all kinds of readers doing numerous kinds of divination and medium readings. And there's free books. We have authors and their books. We have jewelry, gemstones, and minerals, and an on-site cafe, and we have a free book exchange where people can find books on spiritual growth and development, and we have an info table, too. And it's a $3 weekend pass admission, gets you in all weekend long, and it's a wonderful event, and it's just fascinating. And the program will be available at that event as well, but they can go online, chucklingcherubs.com.
Well, very good. Violet, thank you so much for sharing the story with our listeners today and that encouragement that all we need is love. It's certainly been a pleasure.
Daniel, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. And thank you for doing such a great job with the shows and the information that you pass out to the world.
Well, very good. Well, that's what we do. We share our gifts. Thanks again, right, Violet, for joining us here on the program.
Thank you so much.
You can also discover more by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. And also follow us on Twitter at Beyond50Radio as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.